The fields beneath the blood moon. The moon bled that night, staining the sky like a wound that would not heal. The cane below glimmered red, though no wind moved it. Even the frogs fell silent, their throats tightening with a soundless fear. Something beneath that soil had listened for too long, and now it stirred. The plantation had no name left. They'd buried its true one when the river changed course and swallowed the graveyard whole. Only the rusted bell tower remained, leaning over the fields like an old man who had seen too much and dared not speak. Yet the bell still rang, sometimes, though no rope hung from its tongue. They said the cane grew faster there, drinking what the earth remembered. At night, dew gathered thick as sweat, and anyone who walked among the rows could hear whispers moving through the stalks, names, prayers, warnings. The overseers laughed when they first heard them. They stopped laughing when the whispers began to answer back. Do you hear it too, wanderer? A story like this is best told slowly. Lean closer, and if the dark pleases you, follow me further into it. Subscribe to the whisper, and it will never forget you. The first to notice the change was the boy who tended the lanterns. He swore the ground pulsed beneath his feet, faint but steady, like a heartbeat. He said he saw something breathing under the soil, a shadow that swelled and sank with the rhythm of sleep. The others mocked him until the cane itself began to sigh. By the next sunset, a red mist crept between the stalks. It clung to skin, it filled lungs. The workers crossed themselves, though few had been baptized. And then they saw it, the old scarecrow in the farthest field, standing as it always had, only now its sackcloth head turned slowly, watching them one by one. They called for the colonel. He came with his dogs, proud and laughing, certain that fear was only a trick, too, a prayer in chains. They said his whisper was only breath, but the ground pulsed when he spoke. Every word he uttered bent the air like heat over iron. The nights in the quarters had grown longer. The air itself had changed, thicker somehow, tasting faintly of copper and rain that never came. The others slept restlessly, twisting in their cots, muttering names that did not belong to the living. Only one remained awake, the one who prayed in chains. He was called Lazarus. But not the Lazarus from the good book. No, this one had never risen from any tomb. This one had never been allowed to die. They said his heart had stopped once beneath the lash, and when it started again, it beat slower, deeper, like a second drum beneath the earth. No one spoke to him after sundown. He would sit against the wall of his cell, his wrists ironed to the floor, his eyes fixed on the dust between the stones. Then, when the moon reached its middle height, he began to whisper. It wasn't a prayer anyone recognized. Not the Psalms, not the slave hymns, not any tongue known to heaven. The words were soft, drawn out, almost tender, but behind them was something that watched. The rats stopped moving when he spoke. Even the crickets went still, like listeners at a sermon too dangerous to interrupt, and though no wind touched that place, the candle nearest to him always bent toward his mouth. He whispered, "They think the chain binds the body, but the chain remembers the maker." Each syllable sank into the dirt, humming faintly before the sound died away. The others said it was only echo. But one woman, the old midwife, eyes gone white with blindness, crossed herself and whispered back, "Child, you're speaking to something that hears too well." At first, it was only small things that changed. The lock on the iron gate began to rust faster than it should. The water in the trog. After that, they sealed the prayer house. No one was allowed inside. But even through the boarded walls, the whispers continued. The ground there grew warm at night. The vines curled inward, pointing toward the foundation like fingers. Children were warned never to go near it. Yet some nights when the fog rolled in from the bayou, people said you could see him, a thin shape moving behind the slats, mouth still working, head bowed. And always, there came the whisper, soft, almost kind. Every word has a root. Every chain has a memory. One night the moon turned red again and the air thickened like syrup. The boards around the prayer house began to creak. From inside came the steady rhythm of breathing, not one breath, but hundreds, rising and falling together. The field hands crossed themselves. The midwife wept. And then, for the first time in weeks, Lazarus spoke a prayer that all could understand. Let the ground speak. The soil heaved like the belly of a beast. The nails in the board screamed loose. The air turned cold, bright, metallic. And then everything fell silent. When dawn came, the prayer house was empty. Only the chains remained, coiled neatly in a circle, each link etched with something that looked like writing, but shifted whenever one tried to read it. And if you stood there too long, the ground seemed to move beneath your feet, a faint heartbeat, deep below. Listening, waiting, breathing. The wind carried a low hum across the field, a sound too slow to be song and too steady to be silence, and from the far end of the horizon the bell began to ring again. 3. The crossroads candle, a single flame burned in a jar beside the road, fed by oil that no one poured. Those who passed heard a hymn they could not remember learning. The road itself was older than any map. It cut through the bayou like a scar that never healed, bordered by cypress trees whose roots clutched the earth as if afraid to let go. On nights when the moon rose full and ruddy, the air along that road thickened, sweet, damp, and listening. Travelers said a candle burned there at the crossroads, always in the same place, always inside a cloudy glass jar. No hand ever set it there, and yet the wick never shortened. When rain fell, the drops bent around it. When wind came, it blew elsewhere. The flame lived on, trembling, but never dying. The locals whispered that it was a guide for lost souls, a beacon for those who had died far from their kin. But others said it was no guide at all, only bait, the kind of light that makes the dead look back. The first man who tried to snuff it out was a peddler from the east, a stranger who thought himself braver than superstition. He carried a brass cane and wore a hat tall enough to hide his pride. When he reached the candle, he laughed. A trick of children, he said to the trees. A candle in a jar, nothing more. But the trees did not answer. The air around him grew warm, and a faint melody rose from the ditch, slow, mournful, like a hymn hummed through water. The peddler raised his cane and struck the jar. It cracked. The flame bent sideways but did not die. Instead, the light spilled out. Thin threads of gold, reaching like fingers. They touched his wrist, his throat, his eyes, and in that moment, he saw every face he had cheated, every coin he had taken from hands too small to fight back. The light showed him, then entered him. By morning, travelers found his cane standing upright in the mud, the jar beside it whole again, the flame burning steadily within. No trace of the man remained, only his hat, half sunk into the road. The people of the parish learned to give the crossroads wide berth. But curiosity is a slow poison. Some nights, couples dared each other to walk past the candle after sundown. They swore that if you listened close, the flame sang to you, a song you almost recognized, something you'd heard once as a child. In a dream, you were not meant to remember. The melody drew you forward, step by step, and if you stopped, it whispered your name. One such night, a woman named Elsie came upon it. She had lost her husband to the river, and her child to fever. Her grief hung about her like a cloak. She said she wanted only to see the candle for herself. But those who knew her said she wanted to speak to whatever lay beyond it. The flame flickered when she arrived, as if it had been waiting. Her eyes caught the light, and in it she saw two figures standing side by side, one tall, one small, waving slowly, lovingly. Elsie wept. She reached out her hand. "If that's you," she whispered, "then take me too." The flame leaned toward her fingers, a hiss, a gasp of air, and then silence. When dawn came, only the jar remained, its glass unbroken, its flame unshaken. Beside it, in the dirt, 2 footprints led away from the road and vanished into the mist. That same week, travelers began to hear the hymn not only at the crossroads, but along the riverbanks, through the cane fields, under the floorboards of their homes. The tune crawled into their dreams. It came from the earth, from the very breath of the land. Old men said the candle had grown restless. Others said it was hungry. Those who dared approach it again found something new beneath the jar, a circle of blackened soil, wet and glistening, as if the ground itself were bleeding light. And in that light, their faces, faint and shifting, mouthing words no one could bear to hear. "We remember," they whispered. "We are the oil." The candle flared once, a long golden breath that stretched up into the trees, and then settled back into its gentle pulse. That night the wind carried a smell of iron and roses. In the main house on the hill, the bell rope trembled without a hand upon it, and deep beneath the fields, the heartbeat that had begun with Lazarus thudded once more, slow, vast, patient. Somewhere far off, a woman's voice joined the hymn. Somewhere closer, a jar cracked quietly and sealed itself again, and the flame burned on. 4. The whip that cried out. Each crack echoed longer than it should, as though the air itself wept. By dawn, the lash was gone, and the overseer would not leave his room. They said the whip was forged from 7 hides, soaked in salt and oil, until the leather gleamed like polished bone. It hung on the wall of the storehouse, coiled, neat as a serpent, its handle carved with the initials of every man who'd ever used it. No one touched it unless ordered. Even the wind, when it blew through the open rafters, seemed to avoid it. The dust, gathering everywhere but there. It was said that if you stood close enough, you could hear it breathe. The overseer called it mercy, a cruel joke for a cruel man. Every dawn, he would step from his quarters and stand in the yard, his shadow long and thin. The field hands would line up, heads bowed, their faces pale with dew and fear. And always, the first sound of morning was that whip cutting through the mist like a scream. But one night, the air shifted. The candle in his window went out, though the glass was sealed. The dogs began to whine and scratch at their chains, digging at the dirt, as if something below had started to whisper their names. And from the far edge of the fields, near the old prayer house that should have been empty, came a sound, faint at first, then rising, a voice that was not a man's and not the wind's. It said only, "Mercy." The overseer froze at his table. The sound came again, closer now, as if spoken from the walls. He reached for the bottle beside him, hands shaking though he cursed himself for it. "Ain't no ghosts here," he muttered. "Only fools and noise." But the noise did not stop. The boards under his boots began to creak, each groan slow and deliberate, like breath being drawn through wood. Then something sharp snapped. Once, twice, 3 times. The unmistakable sound of leather striking flesh. Yet he was alone. The air grew hot. The smell of iron filled the room. The overseer turned toward the wall, where the whip should have hung. The nail was empty. Only a dark mark remained, like a bruise against the wood. He felt the floor tilt beneath him, his breath catching as the sound came again. Louder now, closer still. Crack! The sound tore through the air, sharp enough to make the glass rattle. A faint streak appeared across his cheek, thin and wet. He touched it. Blood. "Who's there?" he hissed. "Show yourself." But no one answered. The fire in the hearth dimmed to ash. The shadows deepened, stretching long and thin, like cords across the room. He stepped back and found that his boots no longer moved. Something slick coiled around his ankles, unseen but strong. The floorboards sighed, and in the corner, the whip began to uncoil itself. It moved slow, patient, deliberate. The handle rose first, then the tail, inch by inch, like something remembering how to crawl. It slithered forward, dragging its weight across the floor, the sound soft, but full of meaning. "Mercy," it whispered again, though no mouth spoke it. The overseer screamed and ran for the door, but when he reached it, the handle turned hot under his palm. The wood pulsed once, twice, as if the heart of the house had come alive. He turned back and saw that the whip was gone. Only the mark on his cheek remained, burning now, spreading down his throat like a brand. He stumbled to the mirror above the basin and froze. The reflection staring back at him was not his own. The eyes were black, endless, and the lips moved, though he made no sound. "Your hand remembered the pain," the reflection said. "Now your heart will." The mirror cracked. The room fell silent. The overseer backed into the corner, trembling. Outside, the first fingers of dawn reached across the sky, pale and cold, and then came the final sound. Not a crack this time, but a cry. The whip's voice, long and broken, echoing through the house as if mourning its own existence. It rose once, then again, louder, until even the birds fell quiet in their trees. When the field hands came at sunrise, they found the overseer's door locked from within. He answered to no knocks. The dogs had vanished, their chains lying limp and clean. They waited until noon before breaking the door. The room was empty. No man, no body. Only a circle scorched into the floor where the whip had hung, and the faint smell of smoke and salt. In the center of that circle lay the handle of mercy, its leather stripped away, its wood blackened to coal. And from the far end of the hall, they swore they heard a sound, slow, dragging, as if something unseen were coiling its way toward the fields once more. That night, no one dared speak his name. But in the still hours before dawn, some swore they heard the whip again, a single distant crack rolling through the cane, softer this time, almost gentle, like a sigh. And with it came a whisper, carried by the wind. No more. 5. The hands that drew the circle, salt, ash, and a drop of sweat traced symbols in the dirt. When the circle closed, the night folded in on itself like wet parchment. The wind had gone strange again. It didn't move from the sky or the trees. It came from the ground. A deep exhale that stirred dust, lifted hair, and carried the taste of something long sealed. By then, the people knew better than to say Lazarus's name aloud. The air around the prayer house still hummed with his absence, the fields trembling whenever thunder rolled from the west. Yet whispers said his work was not finished, that there were rites still unspoken, sigils left half-drawn beneath the roots. And so, one by one, they began to dream. Every soul in the quarter shared the same vision. A circle traced in salt and ash, drawn not by one hand, but by many. The soil beneath it breathed, and the moon above turned hollow as a skull. They woke gasping, their palms slick with dirt, though none had left their beds. Only the old midwife understood. Her sight was gone, yet she saw more than any of them. She gathered them by the riverside, her voice low, rasping, steady. "He's waitin' for the last mark," she said. "Till it's drawn, the ground ain't done listenin'." She spread a handful of salt upon the earth. The crystals shimmered faintly under the lamplight, as if remembering light older than the sun. Then she lifted a bowl of ash, not wood ash, but bone, and began to mix. The others stood back. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of rain that wasn't there. Somewhere in the cane, a single bird screamed and fell silent. They began at midnight. The first line was drawn by the preacher, a man who had long lost his faith, but still remembered the rhythm of psalms. He pressed his finger into the mix and dragged it across the soil, murmuring words from no scripture, written by man. The second lin, it came from the boy who had tended Lazarus's cell, the one who'd first heard the ground beating. He wept as he traced his mark, his tears dark as the ash itself. The third was from the old midwife. Her hand trembled, but her aim did not falter. Her circle curved true. By the fourth line, the air began to bend. The lantern flames grew thin and blue. Their shadows folded inward, as if drawn toward something vast beneath them. Then came the sweat. One drop for each of them, falling to the center where the lines met. The earth hissed. A crack opened between their feet, shallow but deep enough to reveal light. A faint red glow, pulsing like a heartbeat. "It's listenin'," whispered the midwife. "Don't speak no lies now. It knows the taste of truth." The circle was almost complete when the preacher hesitated. His voice faltered. Something in the dark moved behind him, a figure too tall, too thin, its outline trembling like smoke. "Who stands there?" he called. "Show yourself." No answer came, only the rustle of cane and the low hum of the earth. Then, a whisper. "You called me." The voice was not Lazarus's, but it carried the echo of him, a deeper tone beneath, like another mouth speaking the same words at the same time. The preacher fell to his knees. The midwife shouted for the circle to close, but the line remained open, a breath's width unfinished. The ground began to quake. The red light flared, brighter now, spilling up their legs like smoke. The preacher tried to flee, but his feet sank into the dirt, the soil gripping him like wet hands. "Finish it," the voice commanded. And so the midwife crawled forward, her palms raw, her body shaking. She dragged her finger through the last arc of the circle, sealing it. The instant the line met itself, the sound came, a crack like thunder, but from beneath. The world around them folded inward, the trees bending, as though bowing to something unseen. The moon dimmed, its edges fraying like torn cloth. The red light vanished. Silence. Then the ground began to breathe again. Slow, steady, calm. The air cooled. The wind returned from the trees instead of the soil. The cane stood still once more. They thought it was over. They thought they had put him back to rest. Until they saw the marks on their hands. Where each had touched the circle, the ash had burned into their skin, forming symbols that pulsed faintly beneath the flesh. Not wounds, not brands, but memories. Each mark whispered in its own voice when the night grew too quiet. Some heard names, others heard songs. The preacher heard his own prayers, repeated back to him, word for word, but twisted, answered. "The circle don't bind," said the midwife softly. "It remembers." That morning, the sun rose red again. Not bright, not clean. Dull, like the eye of something waking beneath the horizon. The salt had melted away. The ash had sunk deep into the soil, and from the place where the circle had been drawn came a sound, faint, rhythmic, and steady. The sound of footsteps, walking upward. By the time the people looked, the road beyond the field was empty, but in the dust, they saw the shape of bare feet leading toward the house on the hill, the one whose windows had stayed dark for weeks. The midwife fell to her knees. The others backed away. No one spoke, not even to pray, because they all knew what they were seeing, and they knew who was walking home. 6. The house that forgot its name. Its timbers groaned with memories that were not their own. Doors opened inward to rooms that had never existed before. They said the house on the hill had stood longer than any living soul could remember. The boards were blackened with age. The roof caved where the rain loved it most. Yet still, it would not fall. Each storm that passed seemed to feed it. Each lightning strike left no scar, only deeper color in the grain, as though the wood drank the fire instead of burning from it. No one went near it anymore, not since the footsteps were seen in the dirt, not since the wind had begun whispering names that no one would claim. The house was waiting. And that night, it remembered what it had forgotten. At dusk, the air thickened with the smell of iron and rot. The fields below the hill shimmered, pale as bone dust beneath the waning moon. The midwife stood at the foot of the slope, her shawl drawn close, her hands still marked with the faint, pulsing sigil of the circle. "He's gone where he belonged," she whispered. "But the place don't want him." The preacher joined her soon after, his face hollow, eyes red-rimmed from nights without sleep. The mark on his palm glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Every time he looked toward the house, he swore he saw a window blink. "You feel it too," he said, "like it's breathin'." "Ain't breath," said the midwife. "Ain't life neither." The wind shifted. The front door creaked open, slow, deliberate, though no hand touched it. A sound escaped from inside. Not a groan, not a sigh, but something between them, like wood remembering pain. "It's callin'," the preacher muttered. "Then answer," said the midwife. "You were the one who drew the first line." They climbed the hill. The earth beneath their boots gave slightly, soft and damp, like the inside of a mouth. The grass was cold, though no frost had fallen. When they reached the porch, they found the boards smooth as polished bone, not wood at all. Inside, the air was wrong. Too still, too thick. The kind of silence that listens. The walls seemed closer than they should have been. Every step they took echoed twice, once from the sound itself, and once more from somewhere deeper in the house, a heartbeat later. "Who built this place?" the preacher whispered. "No one builds a thing like this," the midwife said. "It builds itself." They passed a parlor, whose furniture had been arranged around an empty space, as though something large and invisible sat among the chairs. A clock ticked on the mantel, but its hands moved backward, slow and stubborn. The floor groaned behind them, then above them, then beneath. In the hallway, a door stood half open. Behind it, darkness moved like smoke. The preacher reached for the handle, but his hand stopped mid-air. He could feel breath, cold, damp, leaking through the crack. "Do you hear that?" he asked. The midwife nodded. It wasn't the house breathing anymore. It was whispering her name, his name, the names of those who had drawn the circle, each syllable rasped, drawn out by a throat that wasn't flesh. They stepped inside. The room was not a room. It stretched farther than it should have, walls bending outward like fabric filled with wind. At the far end stood a staircase leading down, though they knew there was no cellar beneath this house. Each step was lit faintly from below, red as embers in ash. The preacher hesitated, but the midwife pressed on. She descended slowly, her mark glowing brighter with every step. The air grew hotter. The walls pulsed. Then they reached the bottom. There was no floor, only a vast pit, shallow, widened, and breathing. The soil at its center had split open, and from within came the sound of murmuring, hundreds of voices overlapping like wind in reeds. And there, half buried, lay a door. Not standing, but lying flat across the earth, as though sealing something below. "It's him," whispered the preacher. "He came back." "No," said the midwife. "He ain't never left." She knelt beside the door. The hinges were fused shut with something dark, like dried blood. Her mark burned so bright now that her skin smoked. She pressed her palm to the door. It shuddered beneath her touch. The preacher took a step back. The voices grew louder. They weren't words now. They were sobs, laughter, screams, all braided together into one sound that rose until the air itself bent. "He's awake," she gasped, "and he's hungry for what's his." The door cracked. A single hand, pale as moonlight, nails blackened with earth, pushed through the wood. It gripped the air, trembling, as if feeling for shape. Then another. The preacher fell to his knees, covering his ears as the house began to moan. The walls rippled, doors opened and closed in waves, breathing in rhythm with the pit. "Stop!" he shouted. "You'll tear the world." But the midwife was laughing now, soft, broken laughter that shook her shoulders. "It already is." The floor split beneath her feet. The house groaned, its beams twisting, its name, whatever it had once been, scraped out of memory. The last thing the preacher saw before the dark swallowed him was the midwife's face, glowing from within as the light poured up from the pit. Her eyes were mirrors of the red below, and something else was looking through them. Then the hand in the door opened fully, and the door began to turn, not outward, not inward, but upward, like a mouth learning to speak. By morning, the house still stood on the hill, but no one could recall its name. They remembered its shadow, its shape, even its smell. But when they tried to speak of it, their tongues faltered, their throats closed. Inside, the clock on the mantel still ticked backward, and from beneath the floorboards came a new sound, faint, steady, and unmistakable. Knocking 3 times. Then silence. 7. The bells that rang without a church. 3 tones rolled through the valley at midnight, soft as morning. Each peal marked another soul who had tried to hide his sin. The first bell came when the fog was thickest. It was not a sound from metal, not from tower or rope, but from air itself. A low, trembling note that seemed to come from beneath the ground, as though the earth remembered what heaven had forgotten. The people of the valley knew that sound. It had not been heard in 50 years, and yet their bodies remembered it before their minds did. The way a scar remembers the knife. Children woke crying, dogs hid under porches, and the old ones crossed themselves without thinking, murmuring words their mouths had not shaped in decades. Because the bell meant the same thing it always had. Someone had tried to bury their sin, and the soil had refused the offering. By dawn, the fog still hadn't lifted. It clung low to the ground, thick enough to blur the fences and hide the road. Even the sun, when it rose, seemed reluctant to burn through it, as though afraid of what lay beneath. At the far edge of the fields, the preacher stood by the blackened house on the hill. He hadn't slept since the night of the knocking. His mark still glowed faintly under his palm, and every so often he caught himself pressing it against his chest, as if to keep his heart from answering it. "It started again," said the midwife behind him. "The bells only call when the ground's uneasy." "Uneasy?" he whispered. "It's been uneasy since the night we drew the circle." She shook her head slowly. "This ain't the circle's doing. This is the debt collectin'." The second bell came at noon. It struck clean through the air, a sharp, hollow sound that made the birds fall silent. Even the insects stopped. The whole valley froze, caught between heartbeat and breath. And when the echo died, something answered. A faint weeping, carried on the wind. It came from the riverbank, the same place where the first circle had been drawn, in salt and ash. The preacher and the midwife went there together. The air was colder than it should have been, and the water, though shallow, was dark enough to hide its own reflection. They saw no one at first, only footprints in the mud, small, bare, and facing backward, as though whoever had made them had walked into the river without turning around. The preacher knelt, touching one of the prints. It was warm, and beneath it, faint but steady, the earth throbbed, like a second pulse beneath his own. "He's counting them," the midwife said. "One bell for each sin, one toll for each lie that lived long enough to crawl back home." "And the third?" asked the preacher. "The third don't sound till he's standing among us." By evening, the fog had thickened into a wall. The world shrank to the size of a single lantern's glow. The valley seemed smaller, as if folding in on itself. The horizon gone, the road twisted back toward the fields, no matter which way one walked. The preacher lit his last candle. The flame burned low, bending as though drawn toward something unseen. In that faint light, he saw movement, figures half shrouded in mist, standing in rows across the field. Not people, shadows of them. Each held their hands clasped before them, as though in prayer, and with every faint flicker of light, their faces changed, sometimes the living, sometimes the dead. He stumbled back, clutching the Bible to his chest. Its pages whispered when he opened it, the ink faintly red where it had once been black. "They're the ones he marked," said the midwife. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "Every one of 'em tried to hide from what they done, and the bells remember." The shadows turned their heads toward the house. See on, the hill. The fog shifted. The ground beneath them trembled once, twice, and then went still. The third bell did not ring like the others. It did not sound from the valley, nor the ground, nor the air. It came from within the house itself. The windows shuddered. The roof groaned. The timbers swelled as though breathing in the sound. Every tone seemed to strike the boards themselves, shaking dust loose from the rafters, peeling paint, bending nails. The preacher and the midwife stood frozen at the edge of the yard, the candlelight trembling between them. "It's calling us in," whispered the midwife. "To what?" "Not to him," she said softly. "To what he left behind." The front door creaked open before she could finish. No wind, no hand, just the same patient groan of wood that had seen too much and remembered all of it. Inside, the air glowed faintly red, not from flame, but from the pulse of something buried deep beneath the floorboards. The preacher hesitated. Then the bell rang again. Closer this time, louder, so loud that the lantern shattered in his hand. They entered the house and found no rooms. only space, vast, dark, and shifting, filled with the faint shimmer of dust and smoke. The walls had vanished. The stairs hung suspended in the air, leading nowhere. And there, floating where the ceiling should have been, were the bells. 3 of them, black iron, each carved with names too worn to read. They turned slowly, soundless now, their chains vanishing into the dark above. Below them, the earth was moving, rising, shaping itself into form. The preacher fell to his knees. "It's him," he said. "He's coming back through the tolls." The midwife shook her head. "No, this ain't Lazarus no more." The 3rd bell trembled. The chains rattled. And from its hollow mouth came a hand, slick with soil, clutching something that glowed faintly in the dark. A tongue, blackened, but still moving. The preacher screamed. The midwife didn't. She only whispered. The bells don't call the living. They call what the living owe. The bells began to swing, slow at first, then faster. Each arc sent a pulse through the air, one that made the boards warp and the light bend. And beneath it all, faint but growing, came a sound, footsteps climbing from below. When the bells stopped, their echoes did not fade. They lingered, twisting, folding into whispers that filled the valley once more. And then, far off, from somewhere deep in the fog, another bell began to ring. A 4th, small and hollow, as though newly forged. 8. The mirror of the unforgiven. Those who looked into it saw the moment they first lied to themselves. The glass fogged, then breathed back the truth in someone else's voice. The 4th bell had not yet stopped trembling when they found the mirror. It was lying face down in the weeds behind the house, half buried in ash and clay, as though the earth itself had tried to swallow it and failed. No one had seen it before. No one remembered it being carried or forged. It had simply appeared, the way rot appears on a fruit left too long in the dark. The preacher was the first to touch it. The frame was cold, even in the heat of afternoon. When he turned it upright, the glass did not reflect the sky, but something far below it, water black and still, with ripples that moved though no hand disturbed it. The midwife stepped closer. "Don't stare too long," she said. But it was already too late. The preacher's breath had fogged the glass, and through that thin veil, a shape began to move, a dim figure that stood exactly as he did, only its eyes were open wider than any living man's should be. "What is this thing?" he whispered. "It ain't a thing," said the midwife. "It's a remembering." That night, the fog returned to the valley. The mirror was taken inside, covered with a sheet, and set in the corner of the prayer house. Yet still, it whispered. Through the cloth came faint breaths, soft as sighs, and when the candlelight flickered, the shadow beneath the sheet shifted like something alive. No one prayed that night, not aloud. Even the preacher's tongue felt heavy with silence. He dreamed of faces pressed against glass, hundreds of them, each mouthing the same word, truth. By morning, the midwife found the covering gone. The mirror stood bare in the dim light, its surface dark but stirring, as though the reflection beneath had tides of its own. She saw herself there, older, thinner, her eyes clouded with something she could not name. But behind her reflection was another figure, faint, familiar. A child's silhouette, holding something small and broken in its hands. The sight froze her where she stood. It was her son, the one she'd buried 40 years ago. "Mama?" the reflection whispered. The voice came not from memory, but from within the glass itself, small and trembling. The midwife dropped to her knees. "You can't be here," she said. "You made me stay," said the voice. "You lied when you said you let me go." The mirror clouded, and for a moment, her reflection dissolved. Only the boy remained, watching her with eyes full of hurt and river water. She tore her gaze away and covered the glass again, but the sound of weeping did not stop. By dusk, word had spread. The people came in secret, one by one, to look upon the mirror. They told themselves it was curiosity, not fear. Yet each who gazed upon it left changed, shaking, pale, unable to speak of what they'd seen. A man who'd stolen a loaf saw himself kneeling before an empty table while his own mother starved. A woman who'd cursed her sister saw herself digging a shallow grave in red clay. One boy ran screaming, saying he'd watched himself hang. Each time the mirror breathed out fog, it whispered something in return. Not names, not places, only truths, raw and blood-warm, too old to deny. By midnight, the preacher could hear it calling from across the yard, not with words, but with a rhythm that matched his pulse. Each beat said, "Come back, come back, come back." He rose from his cot, candle in hand, and entered the prayer house. The air inside was damp and cold, as though rain had fallen only there. The mirror gleamed faintly under the cloth, light leaking through in thin lines. When he drew the sheet away, the glass was no longer dark. It showed the house on the hill, but not as it was, as it had been. Clean walls, fresh paint, sunlight through open windows. He saw himself there, younger, proud, full of sermons. And behind him, another man knelt in chains. The preacher's throat closed. He reached toward the image. "That ain't who I am no more," he whispered. But the mirror spoke in another voice, his own, only deeper. "Then why do you still wear his name?" The reflection smiled, a cruel, familiar smile that did not belong to him. The younger preacher in the glass stood, raised a hand, and placed it against the inside of the mirror. The real preacher felt heat against his palm. Then, pain, when he pulled away. His mark, the one burned into his flesh by Lazarus's circle, was gone. Only a black stain remained, spreading like ink. Inside the mirror, the younger man laughed, and the sound echoed around the room like a hymn turned backward. By morning, the valley was different. The fog hung higher now, thin but restless, like breath caught between worlds. The bells no longer tolled, but their silence felt heavy, expectant. The preacher and the midwife stood outside the prayer house, the mirror between them. Neither dared to touch it again. "It knows," said the midwife. "Knows what?" "Everything we told ourselves to sleep at night." The preacher stared at the glass. The reflection no longer moved, but beneath its surface something pulsed, faint, rhythmic, like the beat of a hidden heart. "If it's truth it wants," he said, "what happens when it finds the one truth none of us can speak?" The midwife looked toward the hill, where the house loomed against the dawn. Its windows had changed again, no longer dark, but mirrored, each pane reflecting the rising sun with the same dull shimmer as the glass between them. "Then," she whispered, "it won't be just us looking in." That night, the mirror cracked. A thin line ran from corner to corner, spilling light like blood from a wound. The glass fogged one last time, and through the mist came a chorus of voices, soft, pleading, all whispering the same word in 100 tongues. "Foe, give." Then from the crack, something crawled out, slow, silver, and formless, carrying with it the sound of weeping glass. The fire that did not burn. Flame rose from the earth but gave no heat, only light that revealed guilt like blood on linen. No one screamed, because every tongue was ash. The first spark came without thunder, no storm, no wind. Only the faint hiss of soil splitting open, as if something below had grown tired of listening and wanted to speak. The people of the valley had stopped praying by then. The bells had gone silent, the mirror lay cracked and bleeding light, and the ground itself seemed to hum with a low, pulsing sound that lived between heartbeats. Those who had looked too long into the mirror slept now with their eyes open, whispering truths no one asked to hear. And when the fire came, it did not come to destroy. It came to remember. At dusk, the preacher stood on the hill, watching the fields ripple in strange light. The flame had begun at the riverbank, not orange, but white, clean and sharp, like the edge of a blade. It spread without smoke, without heat, rolling low across the ground in sheets of ghostly shimmer. Everything it touched stayed whole, yet changed. The grass no longer green, but pale as bone. The trees no longer living, but weeping sap, the color of rust. Behind him, the midwife's voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "That ain't fire," she said. "No," said the preacher. "It's something older." "Older than what?" "Than forgiveness." The white flame climbed the hill, slow as a rising tide. The air grew clearer where it passed, but not cleaner. It left behind a silence that carried the faint taste of iron, like the inside of a cut. The preacher took a step back. His boot struck something solid, a book, half buried in ash. He bent to pick it up and saw his own handwriting inside. Every sermon he had ever preached. But the words were blackened, warped, burned from within, and across each page, scrawled in a hand, not his own, was a Engle phrase. "The fire knows the truth." When the first of them stepped into the light, the preacher thought she was burning, but she did not scream. The flame moved through her clothes, her hair, her skin, showing not flesh beneath, but memory. Every lie she had told was written across her in light. Faces she had betrayed, promises left to rot, sins spoken in secret. They flickered like visions, half-formed and holy, until the light dimmed and her eyes turned to glass. The midwife fell to her knees. "It's making confession of the body," she said. "Every sin carved in flame, till nothing's left to hide." The preacher's mark burned under his palm. "And what happens when the fire gets to me?" She did not answer, because she already knew. By midnight, the fire had reached the house that forgot its name. The timbers glowed, but the house did not burn. Instead, it began to breathe, inhaling light through the cracks, exhaling shadow through the roof. From inside came the sound of wood cracking, but not from heat. It was the sound of a door being forced open from within. The preacher and the midwife stood at the threshold. The air inside was white, so bright it blinded. Yet, in that brightness, they saw shapes, figures moving in silence, mouths open as if to sing, eyes hollow and shining like mirrors. "He's in there," said the preacher. "Lazarus." The midwife's voice was barely a whisper. "No, what's in there ain't him no more." The fire reached the doorway and stopped. It curled upward, forming an arch of light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The preacher stepped through. The world changed. Inside, there was no floor, no walls, only endless brightness, flat and depthless, like walking across a sheet of sun. And yet beneath the light, he could hear movement, the faint crack of bones, the low murmur of breath, not his own. He looked down. the brightness beneath his feet. It wasn't ground. It was faces, countless faces, pressed together, glowing faintly from within. Each one whispered a name. His name. "You called the fire," said a voice behind him. He turned. The midwife stood there, her outline blurring, but her eyes were wrong, wide, gleaming, and burning white. "I only drew the circle," he said. "The circle don't end," she whispered. "It burns itself closed." The light rose around them like a tide. It touched his hands first, warm, almost gentle, and when it reached his face, he saw everything. The night he betrayed Lazarus. The prayer that wasn't a prayer, but a curse. The moment he believed mercy was his to grant. The fire showed it all, and as it did, he understood. It wasn't punishing him. It was revealing him. Every lie he'd told had been a match. Every sin, a spark. The fire was only answering. The midwife screamed, not from pain, but from revelation. Her eyes turned white, her voice splitting into two tones, one human, one older. "The truth don't burn," she said. "It only shines." The preacher fell to his knees. The faces beneath him began to fade, their light dimming, their whispers softening to nothing. And then, for the first time, he felt the fire's heat. It wasn't from the ground. It was from below it. A deeper blaze, rising through the bones of the world. The light around him cracked, once, twice, and darkness began to leak through the seams like ink. The midwife's body dissolved into the air, her final words caught in the echo of the fire. "He's not done yet." The flames folded inward. The hill went black. The valley fell silent. And in the quiet that followed, the ground gave a single sigh, soft and deep, like ash settling over bone. The preacher opened his eyes to find himself standing in the ashes of the house. No flame, no light. Only the faint scent of salt and the shape of burned symbols traced into the earth around him. Circles within circles, glowing faintly red. From far off, he heard a sound. Not bells, not wind, water. And from the river's edge came a shimmer, pale and cold, like moonlight caught in motion. It was moving upstream. 10. The dawn of silent chains. Morning came without birdsong, only the rustle of freed shadows. Some say Lazarus walked into the mist smiling, leaving judgment behind to finish its work. The sun rose gray over the valley, its light thin and sickly, like a candle struggling in a dying room. The fields were quiet now, too quiet. No echo of labor, no hum of the overseer's horn. Only the faint creak of rope where no gallows stood, and the low hum of earth that had not yet decided what to keep buried. Those who survived the fire did not speak. Their tongues were pale and still, their eyes faintly silvered, as though they had looked too long at something that did not belong to this world. They wandered the fields in silence, stepping over blackened furrows that pulsed faintly, as if the ground itself breathed beneath the ash. And through it all, one name lingered on the wind: Lazarus. No one remembered the exact moment he had vanished. Some said the fire had taken him whole. Others swore they saw him at the river, standing where the water ran white, the flames reflected in his eyes but not touching him. They said he whispered something into the current before he disappeared, something soft, something like a prayer that wasn't meant for heaven. When they searched for him, they found only a set of footprints leading into the mist, and beside them, a single chain. It was broken clean, not rusted, not torn, broken as if by decision. By noon, the preacher returned. His clothes were black with soot, his face drawn and hollow. He carried the same book the fire had once burned, though now its pages were clean, too clean. He walked the valley like a man unsure of where his feet belonged. Every few steps, he stopped, listening, to the ground, to the air, to the memory of something that still breathed just beneath the soil. "It's done," he whispered to no one. "He's gone." But that night, the chain began to sing. It started as a hum, deep and low, rolling through the ground like thunder turned inward. Those who still dared to sleep woke to the sound and felt something cold coil around their wrists. Gentle but sure, invisible chains, linking them one to another in their dreams. The midwife stood outside the house that forgot its name, the chain draped over her hands. The air trembled around her. "He's still out there," she said, "but he's not bound no more. He's binding us." The preacher turned toward the river. Mist rolled in, thick and silver, and in that mist, a shape moved, slow, deliberate, human in outline but taller than any man. Each step it took left no footprint, only a ripple in the air that shimmered like heat. "Lazarus," the preacher called. The shape paused. Its head turned. Where its face should have been was only light, soft, gold, sorrowful. "You freed them," the preacher said. "But what are you now?" The figure raised a hand. The links of the chain in the midwife's arms began to tremble, each one glowing faintly red, then white, then something deeper, like the color of memory itself. "You asked for mercy," the voice said, soft and distant, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. "And I gave it shape." "Shape?" "Chains can hold sin," Lazarus whispered, "or they can hold light. It depends on who wears them next." The preacher fell to his knees. "Then what do we do?" The figure turned toward the river. "You listen when the dawn goes silent." And then it stepped into the mist and vanished. By morning, the valley was still again. No smoke, no fire, only the faint sound of water moving upstream, carrying something unseen beneath its surface. The preacher stood on the hill, the broken chain in his hands. He could feel it pulsing, faintly alive, like the beat of a distant heart. He looked toward the horizon.